have many people ask me, what is the best size to build my e-learning course at? It's a great question, and it isn't the easiest to answer. There isn't really a right or wrong answer, but there are some things that you'll want to consider. So I wanted to talk briefly about several of those considerations when setting the size of your project. I'm going to be using Storyline here, but there are many similarities to other tools such as Captivate and Lectora. If you use tools like Articulate Rise, which is a true responsive design tool, you don't really need to worry about the project size as it auto-fits its environment. First, why does it matter what the size of the project is? Well, as you'll see, getting the size right means that your project has a good balance of quality and performance. Let's break it down a little and explain what I mean by the size of our project. In Storyline, this is the size of my project in the browser. But really, this is the controllable size of the project. This is the slide or stage area of your project where all your content will be. This is what we can set, and everything else is more or less dynamic. It automatically adjusts to fill the screen or is based on the size of what you set here. Now, we can't control these areas here, but we can turn them off and create custom navigation and title bars, and I'll talk about this shortly. You'll hear me talk a lot about resolution. Resolution simply refers to how many pixels are available, and this is typically measured in how many pixels are in the width and height of what you're viewing. So the higher the resolution means the more pixels you'll have to work with, and generally the sharper everything can look. Over the years, computers and monitors get better, and the resolution and performance goes up, so I wouldn't be surprised if the video is outdated before I get to the end of it, but we'll do our best. So on to some questions that you should ask yourself when determining the size of your next project. The first question, what is my audience using? Is 90% of your audience on PCs running a resolution of 1920 by 1080? Are 73% of them on mobile devices? Gathering audience data is the best way to fine-tune the project size that you want to use. The data may also show that your audience is using all sorts of different resolutions and devices, or you may not have user data and have to just assume all their resolutions and devices are going to be unique. So once you have a better idea if you know your audience, or maybe you have to be a little bit more generic, the next question would be, does my project scale to fit the browser? These days, very likely it does. Storyline 360's modern player, for instance, always scales to fit the browser, whether on PC or mobile device. This gives your audience the best view of your project, as it always fits both low and high resolution screens. So if I publish my project and scale the browser, see how the course scales itself. So everything is visible no matter what size browser you have. You'll notice too that, at least in Storyline, it'll automatically hide this side menu if your resolution gets too small, and on mobile devices, change where the navigation can be entirely. So we'll have to ask the question again, if the project scales, does it even matter what size we use? Well, it sure can. If you go with Storyline's default 720 by 540, put in your assets, which are typically made to the size of your project, so maybe not a very high resolution, and view it in the browser, it will scale up to fit, and yikes, blurry pixels everywhere. Which, side note, Blurry Pixels sounds like a great band name. Just saying. Also, when you use a higher resolution, there's more space, more pixels to work within, and you can position elements a lot more accurately as well. I recommend keeping it at a higher resolution than Storyline's default, without going overboard. And speaking of overboard, if you set your project to 1920 pixels wide, for instance, which is a typical monitor resolution these days, you'll be using graphics that can be pretty large, which means larger files, more computer processing, and bandwidth needs by your audience. And some of your audience in different parts of the world, or some on mobile devices, may have issues viewing a big project like that. It may be too slow for them, or maybe not even load at all. If your project isn't going to scale to fit the browser, or will be launched in an LMS to be a certain size, or maybe it's embedded in something like Articulate Rise, or something else, you may want to do a little testing to find the perfect size for your project. Next question, do I use videos in my project? You may use a lot of videos in your project, and you'll want them to fit in there perfectly on screen. So consider their resolution and aspect ratio. I already talked about what resolution is, but what is aspect ratio? The aspect ratio is the width in relation to the height. If we expand the width, we'd want to expand the height in the same ratio so it doesn't stretch like this or like this. Many videos and movies these days have a 16:9 aspect ratio. And if you want your videos to fit perfectly in your project, you want to use a 16:9 aspect ratio in your project as well. You don't need to know exactly what those numbers mean, but 16:9 is, let's say, just a little bit wider than a 4:3 aspect ratio, which is another aspect ratio you'll see. That said, many people still have a lot of 4:3 based videos, or sometimes another ratio. So just find out what the width and height of the videos are and consider setting your course to that resolution, or at least that same aspect ratio. iPads and many other tablets still do use a 4:3 aspect ratio, or near 4:3, so you may have to make a decision, or just ignore aspect ratios and find the best width to height ratio that works for you. Here's another question. Does my screen need to show anything additional, such as a custom header, footer, or side menu bar? Needing something like this can require you to add additional space to your project size. Let's say we've added a video to our project. It fits perfectly, but then we're told that there should be a header added with the logo and title. What does that do to the size of our project? To prepare your course for this, you need to add the height of the header to the height that you've already determined from, all this other stuff I've already mentioned. So if you're building your project to have a height of 825 pixels, and you have a header that is 50 pixels tall, then you need to add 50 to 825, move your assets down by 50 pixels, and now you've got the space for your header. Next question, does my company or client have any resolution requirements or templates that should be used? You don't want to get to the end of developing a project and your company or your client says, oh hey, we've got size requirements or a template that you should be using. Rework time. So, find out early if the size question has already been answered for you. Along the same line, they may not have a template, but might give you assets that are built to a certain resolution, or there's a PowerPoint file that you're importing. So find out if that's the case, or if you're working with a designer, ask them what they think about the resolution. Finally, when it comes down to it, as you're testing, and I do recommend testing your project in multiple browsers on different computers, on tablets and phones, and if you can throttle or even slow down your internet connection to test, are you noticing a fall off in performance because of the size of your project? Or are you noticing that the quality doesn't seem to be better past a certain resolution? Because you might need to adjust to make sure that the user experience is a perfect balance of those two. As you can see, it is not a simple answer. There are a lot of considerations to what size is going to be best for you. Or just ignore all that stuff I just said and use the size that I've been using lately, which is 1100 pixels wide by 619 pixels high, which is a 16:9 aspect ratio. You may ask, why do I use that size? Well, for all the stuff I've just been saying, it's just kind of evolved into that size over time. Do I ever use other resolutions? I sure do. I just did a project that was 1280 by 720. I did another one before that was 1000 by 562. And sometimes I still need to use a 4:3 aspect ratio on other projects. Long story short, the good news is, give it a little bit of thought, and the size that you decide to use probably won't be wrong, and adjust as needed. Thanks for watching, and happy e-learning!